Well, is it the general public or is it the loud fringe? I wonder, there's that 70% in the middle that doesn't say anything.
Mm.
And then there's that 5 or 10% on the fringe that has a megaphone and yells really loud. And then there are the bot farms on the social media platforms that get on and create what appears to be an organic zeitgeist when in fact it isn't a zeitgeist at all.
Mm.
When I talk to large groups, and I've probably talked to, I don't know, maybe 5 or 10,000 in the last week of middle Americans, they don't feel that way at all. They are as appalled as we are at what's happening at the universities. They are as appalled about the anti-Semitism, the support of these terrorists, and as concerned about them being on American soil and influencing our young people as they can possibly be. But
Mm.
yet, that doesn't get coverage, that doesn't get press at
Yeah.
all.
There's a chance that the 70% are seeing it. I wouldn't say that I think the 70% know the extent of what's going on, although they might be seeing it. The other part of what we have to kind of confront is the reality of algorithms and echo chambers. So when I say that, what I mean is that I often get responses from people who are in that 5% or whatever percent you want to say that it is that kind of supports this. And they genuinely say that they've never seen anything like this whatsoever, right? They've never seen any display of anti-Semitism. They've never seen any support for terrorism. And that's another reality that we're having to confront in the age of technology, right? People build their own echo chambers, and the people in that echo chamber are convinced that we are just making this up. They haven't ever even seen it. And so you can't even get through to them because they don't even have access. They've designed their algorithm so they don't even have access to the things that we're seeing. That's another thing that really, really reinforces their indoctrination, is that they're never being kind of hit with these flashes of truth because they've shielded themselves away from it completely. And this is something that's going to be very interesting and scary to see over time, is what will be the result of these manufactured echo chambers where radicals and extremists just keep getting more extreme because they never see the truth that the rest of us are seeing.
Yeah, that's the problem. If you can't get through those barriers and get people to say, look, you don't have to agree, you just need to consider this. And that's why we did the follow the money exercise, where we showed that these are not organic demonstrations. These are not students that were sitting around the student union or sitting around the dorm and said, hey, you know what? I really feel the need to support these terrorists that came across the border out of the Gaza Strip and attacked these women, children, elderly in their homes. I just feel moved to get behind those murderers. That's not it. We've got these organizers coming in, and we have a disenfranchised youth. We've got these Gen Zers that are sitting around. They don't have a sense of belonging. They got the highest levels of anxiety, depression, and loneliness since we've been keeping records. Everybody's number one need is acceptance and belongingness. And here they come along and say, have I got a cause for you? Have I got something that you can really get behind? And it's very cutting edge. It's very avant-garde. You're going to be really sticking up for all of these people that are trapped. They've come and taken their land, and we're going to stand up for them.
Mm-hmm.
I think it just appeals to them. And they don't, as you said, they don't have critical thinking. They don't ask the hard questions. All of a sudden, they're out there and they've got this scarf on, and boy, they just feel like they're on the moral high ground. And it's shocking.
Well, it is. And there's kind of like a perfect storm of two things colliding. Number one is the guilt for being privileged or elite or white or all of the above. mixed in with the infiltration, right? Because if you think about it, if this was just about standing up for oppressed people, why wouldn't they be protesting for Iran? Why wouldn't they be protesting for Syria? Why wouldn't they be protesting for Darfur, which is the biggest genocide taking place in the world right now? The reason that they can't be protesting for those things, because it doesn't tap into that guilt, right? Because there's no white supremacy or white anything involved in those stories. So there has to be that perfect storm of, hey, don't you feel so guilty for being privileged? Don't you feel so guilty for being white, right? Which is an indoctrination process that's been happening over time. Here's how you can, what I call guilt laundering, right? Here's how you can launder your guilt through the Middle East by standing up for these oppressed people who you've been ignoring and putting down and calling terrorists for so many years. They're not terrorists, they're just oppressed people. And you can finally launder that guilt of yours by standing up for these oppressed people. And that's the perfect storm to motivate them to go out there. But they absolutely won't go out there for any other oppressed people when there isn't any of that, something that they can brand as white supremacy.
Well, I think all we can do is continue to beat the drum. And I can tell you from sitting down with Prime Minister Netanyahu that he is singular in purpose. I look that man in the eye and I can tell you he intends to wipe out Hamas. He is not going to stop until that is done. He fully believes if he stops 1 battalion short of wiping out Hamas, that the noose around Israel will tighten. And he understands there's Hezbollah, he understands there's the Houthis, he understands there's a lot left to do, but he believes that if he doesn't eliminate Hamas and get some kind of provisional government in place in Palestine, that it can be really bad for Israel. So he is 100% committed to finishing that. And at the time I talked to him, he said there were like 3 out of 21 battalions left, and they were in Rafah. And while I was still there, I could hear the bombs going off in Rafah. The leaders, of course, are in Qatar. They're not there. They're in 7-star hotels over in Qatar, living off all the money for what they've stolen from the Gazans. But I can tell you he's not going to stop until they've taken down every Hamas terrorist, collapsed every tunnel, at least the ones that they can find, and they're all interconnected. I think he believes if Iran keeps coming up with these different proxies, it's eventually going to involve them. Hopefully that won't happen, and maybe events of the last few days will create enough distraction that he can get something done and get a foothold. But I think all we can do is just keep educating people as to what's happening here. And I really wonder if these universities are going to penalize these students that have illegally assembled and intimidated, assaulted, incited others to violence against the Jews on their campus. Are they going to suspend them, expel them, take away their credits for at least a quarter, something, have some consequence?
Yeah. And that's what we're going to have to just keep educating the public on. It's one thing for them to get the consequences, but when the public, or well, I shouldn't say the public, the small percentage of people don't really understand why there's consequences, don't really understand why they're being punished, it's good, but it's not optimal. So what we want to do is kind of keep re-educating the public with, the humanitarian aspect of this, the fact that this type of bigotry is absolutely never acceptable, no matter whether a person is white or not white, right? Because that's always been the issue with them, and because they've framed Jews as white people, they think it's acceptable. They think anti-Semitism is acceptable when it's just simply not. So yeah, our task is going to be education from now going forward.
Well, consider me on the team. And if there's anything I can do to help you as you do this, or if there's anything that you have that needs to be spread, we need to stay in touch, and let's continue to beat this drum until we get it out there.
Absolutely. We absolutely will stay in touch. This is going to be a concerted effort. This cannot be done by one or two of us. We have to make sure that we are, all collaborating to keep this education and, as you said, beating this drum going.
Well, there is a team of us. We will stay connected, and if there's anything that you've got that needs dissemination, you get it to me and I will make sure it gets out, and I will do the same thing. And I appreciate you talking to me today. Let's stay the course and just not give up the fight until we get the word out there, because I think the worm is beginning to turn. I really do.
I think so. We just have to keep being consistent with the same message, because you know what? There's no ideological inconsistencies with anything that we say. The reason that some of these more kind of ultra radical left wing media now has to hide the fact that the Iranians inside Iran are opposing the regime is because when they're confronted with the fact that Iranians don't like the regime, and they're confronted with the fact that this regime isn't a good thing, by extension, they have to say, well, maybe that their proxies are terrorists too. So they've gotten themselves into a bind where they cannot get a clear ideological consistency going on. They fall short because what they're saying is just simply not true. Whereas there's no ideological inconsistencies in any of the things that we've been saying. It is moral clarity, it is moral consistency, and it is ideological consistency. And that's the course that we have to stay.